You're sitting at a family gathering. Maybe it's dinner. Maybe it's a holiday. The table is full, people are talking loudly, someone is laughing in the corner, and from the outside everything looks normal. Maybe even perfect. But inside your chest there's a quiet tension. Every conversation feels like walking on thin ice. Someone makes a joke about something you did years ago, and everyone laughs, but something about the way they said it feels different. It feels less like humor and more like a reminder of your place. You smile politely. You nod. You keep the peace. But later that night, when everything is quiet and you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling, a strange thought crosses your mind. Why do I feel emotionally exhausted after spending time with my own family? It's a question many people ask themselves, but few people feel comfortable saying out loud. Because from the moment we are born, we're taught one very powerful belief. Family is everything. Family is unconditional. Family is forever. And because of that belief, the idea of distancing yourself from family feels almost forbidden. It feels wrong, selfish, even cruel. But psychology tells a much deeper story. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are also the ones slowly draining you. And the most confusing part is this. When you grow up in a toxic family environment, you often don't realize it's toxic. You simply think it's normal. Think about a child growing up in a home where criticism is common, where emotional manipulation is subtle but constant, where love sometimes feels conditional. That child learns something very important very early. Peace must be earned. So they start adapting. They become the peacemaker, the responsible one. The one who apologizes even when they did nothing wrong. The one who absorbs tension just to keep the atmosphere calm. And slowly, without realizing it, that child becomes emotionally hyper-aware. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. It's when your brain becomes extremely sensitive to emotional signals. A small sigh, a change in tone, a raised eyebrow. These tiny signals become warnings. Your brain learns to scan the emotional environment constantly, like a radar searching for storms. At first, this adaptation helps you survive the environment. But over time, it becomes exhausting. Imagine living in a house where you constantly feel like you need to manage everyone else's emotions just to avoid conflict. Your brain never fully relaxes. Your nervous system stays alert. Your body holds tension you don't even notice anymore. And here's something fascinating neuroscience has discovered. The brain processes emotional threats in ways that are surprisingly similar to physical danger. When someone experiences repeated criticism, guilt, or emotional manipulation, the brain activates the same stress responses it would during a real threat. Your body releases cortisol. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tighten. Even if you're just sitting at a dinner table. That's why some family interactions leave people feeling drained for hours or even days afterward. Your body experienced stress. Even if your mind tried to tell you everything was fine. But eventually, something begins to change. Maybe you move out. Maybe you meet healthier people. Maybe you start reading about psychology or speaking with a therapist. And slowly, your perspective shifts. You start noticing something strange. Some relationships in your life feel light and easy. You can laugh. You can speak freely. You can be imperfect without feeling judged. But other relationships, especially certain family ones, feel heavy. Conversations feel tense. You feel smaller. You feel like you're constantly defending yourself. And eventually a realization appears. A realization that feels both liberating and terrifying. This dynamic isn't healthy. And this is where psychology becomes incredibly interesting. Because families operate like emotional ecosystems. Every member unconsciously plays a role that helps maintain the balance of the system. One person becomes the caretaker. One becomes the critic. One becomes the peacekeeper. One becomes the rebel. And these roles can remain stable for years, sometimes decades. But when one person begins to change their role, the system reacts. Imagine a table with uneven legs. For years, one person has been holding one corner of that table so it appears stable. But the moment they stop holding it, the table begins to wobble. Suddenly everyone notices the imbalance. This is exactly what happens when someone begins setting boundaries in a toxic family. People say things like, "You've changed. You're too sensitive. You think you're better than us now." But here's the truth. The person who sets boundaries hasn't become the problem. They've simply stopped carrying the emotional weight for everyone else. And that shift can be incredibly uncomfortable for people who benefited from the old dynamic. This is why people who distance themselves from toxic families are often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like rejection. But from the inside, it often feels like survival. And perhaps the most painful part is this. Walking away from toxic family dynamics doesn't mean you stop loving your family. In fact, many people who create distance still love their families deeply. They still wish things could be different. They still hope that one day conversations will feel safe. But love alone cannot repair unhealthy patterns. And sometimes distance becomes the only way to protect your mental health. Now here's something people rarely talk about. When someone walks away from toxic family dynamics, they often experience two emotions at the same time: relief and guilt. The relief comes from finally escaping the constant tension. But the guilt comes from years of conditioning. A voice inside your head whispers things like, "Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's my responsibility to fix this. Maybe I should try harder." That inner conflict is incredibly common. Because even when you logically understand the situation, emotionally you're still connected to years of memories, expectations, and cultural beliefs about family. But something powerful often happens after distance is created. For the first time in years, the nervous system begins to relax. You start noticing things about yourself again. Your opinions, your interests, your personality, your voice. For so long, your identity may have been shaped by reacting to other people's emotions. Now you begin discovering who you are when you're not constantly managing someone else's feelings. And that rediscovery can feel almost like breathing fresh air after being in a crowded room for too long. You begin building healthier relationships. Friends who respect boundaries. Partners who communicate openly. Communities that value mutual care instead of obligation. Anthropologists actually point out something interesting about human history. For thousands of years, humans have created families that go beyond bloodlines. Tribes, allies, mentors, chosen families. The idea that family must always mean genetics is actually a relatively recent cultural expectation. In reality, belonging has always been something humans create through connection and shared values. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation happens internally. The person who once felt small inside their family system begins developing something stronger. Self-trust. They begin trusting their emotional instincts. They begin believing their experiences. They stop constantly questioning their own perception. And that kind of self-trust is incredibly powerful, because it changes every future relationship. It changes the way you communicate. It changes the way you set boundaries. It changes the way you choose the people who are allowed into your life. But maybe the most compassionate truth about people who walk away from toxic families is this. They usually didn't leave quickly. Most of them tried for years. They tried explaining. They tried forgiving. They tried adapting. They tried keeping the peace. And only after countless attempts did they slowly realize something difficult. Some relationships cannot become healthy simply because you want them to. And sometimes protecting your peace becomes the most loving decision you can make for yourself. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of self-respect. Because healthy relationships, whether they are family, friendships, or partnerships, should make your nervous system feel safe. Not constantly alert. They should make you feel seen. Not judged. Accepted. Not controlled. And maybe the real psychological lesson here is this. The relationships meant for you will never require you to shrink just to belong. So if you've ever wondered why some people choose to step away from toxic family dynamics, the answer isn't selfishness. More often, it's courage. The courage to break cycles. The courage to protect mental health. The courage to create a life built on respect rather than obligation. And if this topic made you reflect on your own experiences or relationships, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sometimes sharing perspectives can help others feel less alone in their own journeys. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind human behavior, consider subscribing. Because understanding the mind doesn't just teach us about others. Sometimes it helps us understand our own story a little better too.